So my name is Maria Koinova. I shake the hands with, I think, most of you. I'm a reader in international relations at the University of Warwick at the Politics and International Studies Department, and I direct this project, Diaspora and Contested Sovereignty, which has been dealing with the transnational activism of different diasporas, which are related to conflict and post-conflict regions. Speaking of Bosnia, starting of Bosnia and Iraq, the Kurdish areas, Palestine, Kosovo, and Karabakh. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I want to introduce the speakers, and a panel, very distinguished scholars and practitioners. I want to quickly introduce the project and in very broad strokes discuss the Dayton Accords, what has happened and what might have happened better, and actually open this for a discussion later on. And the final part of my presentation will be to give you some flavor of my own research that I did in the Bosnian diaspora and among Croats and Serbs in the Netherlands. I think that diaspora activism is a very important part of the life, of social life and political life of Bosnia and Herzegovina alongside other groups, but it is very much under the radar screen. And it is under the radar screen both of politicians, both of academics, and also of community people. So in a certain way, we are here to give a lot of voice to those concerns about how people in the diaspora live and how the people in the diaspora really connect to their countries of origin, in what ways they see themselves being able to do something in a different way in order to help the homeland or to be helped by the homeland in one way or another. So let me introduce the speakers. Dr. Eric Gordy is here right next to my right. He's a senior lecturer in politics and Southeastern Europe at the School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies at University College London. He's a very well-known scholar of Southeastern Europe. He has taught in the United States, in America, and in other European places, apart from being here for quite some time in the UK. So he has a lot of publications and very important books. The one is The Culture of Power in Serbia, Nationalism and the Destruction of Alternatives, which was published in 1999, and Guilt, Responsibility and Denial, The Past at Stake in Post-Milosevic Serbia, which was published in 2013. And he has just been in Serbia, as I understand, and he may have very fresh evidence to share with us about a lot of things happening right there in the region. Dr. Waqar Azmi Obi is here next to Eric Gordy's right. He is the chairman of the charitable initiative Remembering Srebrenica, established in 2013 to commemorate the Srebrenica genocide in the UK and to educate the British society about this very tragic chapter of European history. Formerly, Dr. Azmi was the UK government's chief diversity advisor at the Cabinet Office and European Union ambassador for intercultural dialogue. He was also vice chairman of the National Rural Race Equality Trust and chair of the British Federation of Racial Equality Councils. In 2006, Dr. Azmi received an honorary doctorate from Southampton Solent University in recognition of his contributions to race relationships in the UK. In the same year, the University of Central Lancashire conferred on him an honorary fellowship. Dr. Azmi has also received awards from the Royal Society of Arts, Britain's Young Achievers, Asian Achievers Award by the Lloyds Bank, and honorary master's degree from the University of Worcester. So here tonight, Dr. Azmi is in a situation to speak about the memorialization of Srebrenica genocide, the worst crime, as we said, in Europe has happened ever since the Second World War. So maybe he will tell you more about remembering Srebrenica, but just in broad strokes to say that this is initiative to raise awareness of the lessons that has happened in Srebrenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995, to teach current and future generations about the lessons of tolerance and intolerance, and to work towards achieving and motivating different people to work against intolerance in the British society. So there is an important educational program, Lessons from Srebrenica, which he will probably engage in more detail, and the charity is working also with political and religious leaders in Bosnia in support of that kind of mainstream idea about how to teach people against intolerance and to understand the lessons of this implosion that happened in former Yugoslavia. And to the right of Dr. Azmi is Dzeneta Karabegovic, who is a PhD research fellow at the Politics and International Studies Department at the University of Warwick. So she is working also with the Diaspora and Contested Sovereignty project, and she focuses specifically on the Bosnian diaspora in Europe in issues of transitional justice, political participation, and remembrance. So Dzeneta in the past 3 years conducted work in Bosnia, in Sweden, in Germany and France. She has developed also numerous relationships also here in the UK. She comes from the University of Chicago, where she got a MA degree in International Relations, and she has been also a Fulbright Fellow as well in Uppsala University. She holds a degree from the University of Vermont, and she has been born and partially raised in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So in the final part about the presentation of this round of discussion is about the project of Diaspora and Contested Sovereignty. So this is a European Research Council sponsored project which has been interested in understanding not simply how migrants are integrated in their societies, but how, when they're integrated or not integrated, how do they really make a difference in transnational relationships towards their countries of origin. And this could be related to periods of conflict and periods of post-conflict reconstruction, and apparently here with the Bosnian case we're working much more in the post-conflict reconstruction section. But the project has also other interests, as I mentioned in the very beginning. This is about de facto states, on which I work as a sub-project within the larger project. This is about Kosovo, Palestine, and Nagorno-Karabakh. There was a postdoc who worked on the Kurdish diaspora, and there is another PhD student who works on the Iraqi diaspora. And finally, what we are doing in the next year and a half, we are launching a big survey in different countries to understand how not simply elites, but also regular people respond to these questions. So let me tell you something more about to cast the discussion for tonight. Most of you probably know about the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which started in 1992 and shocked the world with the level of violence against civilians. The term ethnic cleansing was developed during that war, unfortunately. Now this ethnic cleansing has been happening in other places. So another estimated 100,000 people, and maybe more, have died during that war, and more than 2 million people were displaced in the various parts of former Yugoslavia, but also abroad. So here we are talking about 350,000 refugees that joined in Germany, about 300,000 to Croatia, Austria to 80,000, and other important destinations which became the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, United Kingdom, the US, Canada, and Australia. Rape, especially of Bosnian women, and internment in concentration camps was a common practice during the war, in addition to other human rights and humanitarian law violations, which prompted somewhat belated international community to intervene militarily in 1995 and signed the Dayton Peace Accords in Ohio. So the Dayton Peace Accords is this general framework, which is a peace accords that also set up the establishment of the state, and was signed 2 days from now, 20 years from now. This is like on the 21st of November, 1995, and was later signed by officially in Paris by Yugoslavia's President Slobodan Milosevic, Bosnian President Alija Izetbegovic, and Croatian President Franjo Tudjman. So in 1999, Richard Holbrooke, who was the chief negotiator of this agreement, he published an autobiographical book which was called To End the War. And in academic circles, at least, to end the war became a buzz phrase because it indicated the role of Dayton in a certain way as ending a war, but then asked a very big question about to what degree this was an accord that set the conditions for a viable state. And ever since then, we have been hearing a lot of criticism of Dayton on numerous levels. So let me tell you something about Dayton, or probably of people who do not know about the Dayton arrangement of the Bosnian state. It arranged that Bosnia and Herzegovina is constituted of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, controlled primarily by Bosniaks and Croats, and of Republika Srpska, which is controlled primarily by Bosnians and other institutions. The federation is further decentralized into 10 cantons, with Republika Srpska more centralized and having another. The central government retained powers, together with a rotating 3-member state presidency, a central bank, and a constitutional court. The Dayton Agreement gave a mandate to a large body of international organizations to oversee its implementation, which was the office of the High Representative with his so-called bond powers, to implement the civilian aspects, the NATO forces, IFOR, to implement the military and security aspects, and Organization for Security and Cooperation of Europe, to implement the democratization and election aspects. So the following broad strokes are about what worked and what didn't work in Dayton, and I'm sure that our panelists in one way or another will pick on these points. The Dayton Agreement postulated that refugees and displaced persons have the right to return to their original pre-war areas. Immediately after the war, the so-called majority returns took place, where people returned to their original homes in areas where the ethnic group was in a majority. In the 2000s, which is kind of pretty several years later, some minority returns started taking place, but they have been much more sporadic and much less successful. Many returned to reclaim their property, often simply to sell it and buy it in majority areas. Minority returns have been obstructed by uncooperative majority elites, bureaucrats, and employers who created various obstacles. Discrimination, problematic access to housing and employment, and ethnically motivated violence were a huge impediment. The education system has also been divided ethnically. Although security concerns have improved, mistrust and lack of reconciliation have plagued these communities. Some may even not have wanted to return because of those memories of what they have gone through the war. By embedding clauses of refugee returns in the pre-war areas, Dayton did not allow for creation of ethnically homogeneous territories, but it did not challenge the rule of ethnic politics either. This is one of the most contested and problematic issues of present-day Bosnia. The rotating 3-member presidency with a Bosniak, Croat, and Serb representative allowed for the so-called power sharing on what we call in academia consociation arrangement, but has created less stable and less cooperative governments where veto powers have been threatened and exercised to obstruct the passing of laws and other policies. Ethnic elites have remained in the rule of these power-sharing arrangements on other institutional levels as well, retaining their prerogatives to rule within the predominantly ethnic parties. Hence, ethnic politics has become entrenched in the very institutions of the post-Dayton state. 20 years later, nationalist elites continue to be motivated to reproduce their own exclusively ethnic boundaries and parties and their ethno-nationalist ideologies. Dayton also conferred rights to the constituent peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are namely the Bosniaks, the Serbs, and the Croats. And if one were having another identity, the others, like the Roma or some Jews, for example, that identity became secondary, and there is no place for those who simply consider themselves Bosnian unless they declare themselves of a constituent people's member. So recognizing these and other issues stemming from the Dayton Agreement, since 2005 primarily, there have been a constitutional international engagement about changes in constitution and institutional reforms. and proposing various solutions which range from abolishing Republika Srpska, or the federation, to creation of stronger municipalities, or the creation of a third Croat-dominated entity, among many others. This process has been paralleled by the regionally driven openings for Bosnia and Herzegovina to seek future membership in the EU. So Bosnia and Herzegovina is already a signatory to a stabilization and association agreement, which was signed in 2008, ratified in 2010, and entered into force in 2015. So discussions about the stalled reform process, EU integration of the Balkans, and continuous ethnic divisions of ethnic tensions in Bosnia and Herzegovina have dominated the news. And I really have to say that these are news that have been very, very scarce about Bosnia and the Balkans in general. The mobilization of diasporas have been even more scarce and even less in the public eye or on the public radar screen. So in that sense, our ERC project has been trying to make this difference. So the last part of my presentation is to tell you something about my own research, which I did in the Netherlands in 2012, driven by the interest to understand why is it that after almost 20 years, I mean, at that time, the Bosniaks were still very mobilized in a very sustained way. Slowly, this kind of mobilization started going away among Croats and among Serbs. It doesn't mean that they were not mobilized, but they were much more episodically organized in this way. So I went there armed very much with the ideas that come from our academic literature. So is it that how the migration integration regimes are impacting on these people to mobilize? And the question was no. Is it about the foreign policy of the state that really makes something about these people to deal in a different way? And my answer was somewhat no. Is it something about these ultranationalist parties that are really coming up with these very problematic anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant discourses, and specifically in the party of Geert Wilders has been at that time, and still continues. And to a certain degree, the answer was yes. But the biggest and interesting issue which came up for me in the Netherlands was the realization that the past of unresolved relationships between the Bosniaks and the Dutch state, which were embedded in the, can I have some more? In the agreement. Thanks. So, the most important part was that people who were in this relationship with the state, the Dutch state, was really problematic. Why was it problematic? Because if you remember, the Dutch BAT, which was the UN-mandated peacekeepers who were stationed in Srebrenica, were the ones that over time were shown that they have ceded the power to the Serbian paramilitaries, which brought the Srebrenica genocide and more than 8,000 people killed. So in that sense, the Dutch story, the relationship between the Bosniaks and the Dutch state was not resolved. A lot of other issues were coming up. There was like court cases, mobilization of all kinds of sorts. Something which you don't see in a certain way in Sweden, for example. I mean, that's a place where the Bosniaks were much more easily adjustable to their new realities and managed to go over their transition. I want to finish this presentation and pass the word to Eric Gordy. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening, and thanks for inviting me. Since we're marking this is the 20th anniversary of the Dayton Agreement, I can also say this is the first time I've been in Coventry, and the first time that I'm on a panel with Dzeneta.
Yes.
So it's a very, very exciting day for all kinds of reasons. Oh, sorry. Let me try to give you some background in this sense. One of the things that that Maria asked me to do in talking about Dayton is to try to engage it from the point of view of my discipline. And my discipline is political sociology. So when we say political sociology, what do we mean? I mean, there is a whole field of politics out there. There are people who call it political science, which is so adorable. People in that field are engaged primarily with political actors, with institutions, with rules, that is, with things that happen at the structural level. In doing political sociology, you try to approach very similar questions, but from a different level. By talking about what is happening, on a wider scale and below the level of institutions, and how people in different parts of the public interact with institutions. And in doing that, we make a few assumptions. And these are assumptions, I mean, if you consider what Maria has just told you as the kind of general outline of the Dayton Agreement, and think for a second about the kind of state, the kind of institutional environment that is created by that kind of agreement, you'll see that they come into collision with a lot of our basic assumptions. The first of which is that there exists some kind of body, at least on an abstract level, that we can call a political community. The second of these assumptions is that members of this community are brought together and also in some ways divided by something that we call identity. That people may disagree about identity, but it provides a shared or common touchstone, if you want, for everybody in the community. And the third assumption that we make about political communities is that they have rules. Now, it is really difficult to try to maintain any of these assumptions as active or alive in the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina under the Dayton Agreement, okay? And why is this? You've already had a few details about the Dayton Agreement, but well, let me see. Do people know this? See how much background I have to give. Do people know what the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina is? Okay. The Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina is not a freestanding document. It does not exist in any of the three identical languages of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina is Annex 4 of the Dayton Peace Agreement. And you can find it in the original text of the Dayton Peace Agreement. It runs from page 59 to page 74. Okay, so this is the constitution of the state, and the reason that it looks like that is that it was a part of, and it's specifically stated in two instances in this Annex 4 Constitution. It says this constitution will be superseded by a constitution that is adopted by agreement between the political actors in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Well, 20 years have gone by and that has not happened, okay? So the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina is kind of like the plumbing repairs that I do in my house. It is a temporary solution that for a variety of reasons ends up becoming permanent. And it's about as functional as most of my plumbing repairs. This is International Men's Day, They say men are supposed to know how to do home repairs. Everything I know I learned from YouTube videos. But in any case, so it's a temporary arrangement that has become permanent, and it is made between parties that do not share the same goals, and who are led by people who mistrust one another. That is to say that one of the reasons that this temporary document has not been replaced by a permanent one is that it doesn't fit with any of the designs of the political leadership. Because basically, okay, you've got a description of what the Dayton Peace Agreement is, but let me offer you another description that is a little bit more radical, because I know you're kind to invite me over here, and now I come and be provocative.
Okay, go.
I'm sorry. Yeah. But the Dayton Peace Agreement was a deal. The leaders of the militarized radical wings of self-declared ethnic factions were told, if you stop killing people, we will guarantee that you remain in positions of political power forever. And they said, that's a great deal, we'll take it. Because it was what they wanted in the first place. So, if we want to talk about successes and failures of Dayton, I mean, let's go to the success that everybody's going to be congratulating themselves for, in the coming weeks. It's that it did stop the fighting. There has not been large-scale violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina since the signing of the Dayton peace agreement, and this is good because nobody normal really likes large-scale violence, right? What its failures mostly derive from is the kind of deal that it was. It cemented these different political groups in power, meaning that it preserves the conditions that were leading to violence and that were created by violence, and by creating political structures that are all constructed around principles of ethnicity. It takes a community that was pretty diverse and ethnifies it in a narrow way by forcing people to identify for purposes of representation as Serb, Bosniak, Croat, or then there's this undefined fourth category, other. Those are the four things that you're permitted to be by law in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in doing so, by creating this narrow base of political power that is repetitive, it produces political structures of leadership and control that are parasitic, that are resistant to change, and that are not subject to democratic accountability. So if we want to say the two main features of the agreement, okay, the principle according to which the Dayton Agreement was supposed to work is that it did this. First, it satisfies the ethnocratic politicians by creating ethnic territories. And the second thing that it does is it provides international oversight in the form of the Office of the High Representative to try to moderate the effect of having created ethnic territories. That is to force the ethnocratic politicians, when they do something too extreme, to pull back or to overrule them when they do. So what have been some of the principal consequences of this? One of the main consequences is this. There is very, very little opportunity to create any kind of change within the political system. What you have seen is the same parties, the same individuals, the same cliques exercising political power regardless of the results of elections. So you have the creation of this permanent parasitic elite that justifies its continued operation in power on the basis of ethnicity. Second, you have enormous incentives for politicians to remain in power. So that public officials, elected public officials in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the members of parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina, are the highest paid members of parliament in the entire region of Southeast Europe. There is a guarantee that politicians can continue receiving their pay after they leave office. A system that's been called white bread. There is a provision that makes it perfectly permissible for a person to hold multiple public offices at the same time and thereby draw multiple salaries. And at the same time, having control over economic goods and industry and processes of privatization, because this is another part of this European integration process that is being promoted, means that there are tremendous opportunities for the production of income through corruption and through insider privatization. And all of this is allowed to happen because of the lack of democratic processes and structures and the radical subordination of politics to principles of nationality and ethnicity. So let's talk about nationality. Because any time in public, you talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you're to tell somebody that you're from Bosnia and Herzegovina, I absolutely guarantee the first question you will get is, "Oh, are you Serb, Croat, or Bosniak?" Right? Because it's the one thing that everybody knows. Is this actually the way that people feel? or is this something that's just represented in documents and political rhetoric? The research suggests that it is not representative of ways that people feel. Large-scale surveys of young people in multiple places in Bosnia and Herzegovina by two social scientists, by Daniela Majstorovic and Vladimir Turjačanin, indicate that when people are asked with what forces and what institutions they identify, religion is much stronger than nationality. That is to say, people are much more likely to identify as Muslim or one of the varieties of Christian than principally as a member of an ethnic or national group. And also that what you might call universalistic values, I've forgotten how to speak, are as popular. People identify with them as strongly as nationalist values. You find similar results in research by Paula Pickering, who has talked about refugee returns. And when she asks people how they identify themselves, they talk about the place that they're from. They will say they're a human being. They will say they're a citizen of the world. The first answer that people are likely to produce is not one of the three principal national groups. So Paula Pickering says, and here I'll quote her, that these national categories represent a rearguard effort to impose a severely simplified frame on a complex reality. So what does this look like when it's confronted with democratic processes? Let me tell you about a couple of lawsuits. First one is a lawsuit filed by two people, Dervo Sedic and Jakob Finci. One of them is the president of the largest Roma organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The other is the president of the largest Jewish organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And they go to the European Court of Human Rights, and they say that the Bosnian constitution violates human rights because it is possible to be elected to public office as a representative of one of the three national groups, but not as any other national group and not as a citizen. And in 2009, the European Court of Human Rights agrees and orders changes in the Constitution. That was 6 years ago, and I'm sure those changes will be coming any day now. Few years later, another person makes a similar lawsuit. Azra Zornic files a suit before the European Court of Human Rights. And she says, I do not declare myself as a member of any national groups. And in this way, the Constitution violates human rights because it makes it impossible for me to stand for public office. Now, she won the case too, so there are two decisions requiring the Constitution to be changed. But one interesting thing about this case, the representatives of Bosnia and Herzegovina arguing before the court offer this argument. They say, she might be right, but she always has the choice of declaring herself to be a member of one of the national groups, and then she can participate in public life. Now, this is an argument that was not accepted by the court, but the fact that it was made is really kind of telling. You found a similar kind of controversy in elections a few years ago. When a social democrat was elected as the Croat member of the Bosnian state presidency, which has three members, one from each of the national groups. So Željko Komšić wins this election, after which point there is tremendous objection from the leading Croat nationalist party, saying, first of all, he can't be a representative of the Croats because a lot of people who were not Croats voted for him. And second, they said, when Dayton provided that there would be a Croat member of the presidency, we understood it as meaning that it would be from our party. For the representative to come from another party is wrong. And this is something that's dominant in official perception. You could see it yesterday when there was this awful attack. Somebody with a gun fired on serving soldiers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Minister of Defense, when talking about casualties, said, well, yeah, we have three casualties. He said, one of them is a Serb, one of them is a Bosniak, and one of them is wounded. They're national categories.
Actual quote.
Yeah, he did say that. So what does nationality do when it's elevated to this level of political principle? One of the things that it does is, because the principle of representation is a national principle, there are always incentives for people operating on that principle to escalate rhetoric and to escalate tactics. And you can see this in so many instances. It's almost pointless to talk about one. And the second is, there is a strong incentive to conformity. That is, to diminish the level of diversity within each of the groups. And this is all probably intensified by this institution of international oversight, where the High Representative is meant to be there to moderate the behavior of the nationalist parties, but has the kind of perverse effect of radicalizing all of them. First of all, because everybody resents the High Representative, and second, because they know if they do anything really stupid, it won't have any consequences because it'll be overruled by the High Representative. And so you get, after 20 years, this state of political paralysis, of emptiness, of incapacity for change. A couple of anthropologists have come up with interesting terms for this. Steph Janssen has described this situation. He invented the term Daytonitis. Azra Chromajic titled her book on young people and their perceptions of life in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The title of her book, which is brilliant, by the way, you should run out and buy it, not before I've finished. Citizens of an Empty Nation. And the basic problem that is at the source of all of these things is that you have a state with structures that were designed to meet the needs of warring parties, formerly warring parties now, but not of citizens. And citizens occasionally respond. You could see responses in a couple of waves of protest in 2013, when the parliamentary parties were unable to reach an agreement that would make it possible for newborn children to get identity documents. And this was the inability of one infant to travel. She wanted to travel to Serbia to get medical care that was not available in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You had a long wave of protests, they called it the Belorusia, to force the parliament to agree to meet this basic need. And you saw rebellion of people across the country representing all of these so-called national groups. You saw it again last year in the movement that started as a movement against the deliberate political increase of unemployment and against dishonest privatization of firms, and that culminated in the forming of citizens' plenums that met together to make demands because they were persuaded of the inability of official representative institutions to address their demands. You've been seeing it over the last year in places like Tuzla, where factories that have been put under forced administration, receivership by official sources, and that have not worked for years. Some of them, like the Dita chemicals, soap and detergent factory in Tuzla, the workers took it over, started producing again, started developing networks of distribution in spite of the inability of the official ownership and management of the factory to do the same. In fact, their declared willingness to keep it closed, to keep these workers out of work. So what does this all add up to? It means if we're talking about the Dayton Peace Agreement, yeah, we have to recognize the achievement that it has, that it did bring an end to this long and terrible period of violence. But we need to ask whether the agreement that offered a reasonable alternative in 1995, does it still meet the needs of citizens 20 years later? And we can also ask why this matters, because look, the creation of entities and enclaves and division of territory and recognition of demands by the most extreme armed groups, this has become the formula that is being repeated elsewhere, okay? This is the formula for peace agreements that was adopted in Iraq, that there's an effort to adopt in Libya, that there's discussion about adopting in Syria. So territoriality, power sharing, ethnic fundamentalism, these have become the new international politics of peace, and we have a chance to see in what ways it works and what kind of consequences it created, it might be good to take those into account. And I should probably stop there. I have a feeling I talk too much.
Oh, okay, thank you. That was very interesting, Eric. I want to apologize. I didn't feel good when I was deferring the discussion to him, but we want to see through some entry-exit poll whether it's possible for us to understand how much really we have some impact on your learning. So can you please distribute these flyers?
I think
they already have it. So yeah, okay. So I just wanted to make sure that that you can have a look at this text. Okay. So now can we, Waqar Azmi, continue? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dobro večer. Pokušavam naučiti bosanski, so I'll speak in my speech in English. Great to be here, Maria, Dzeneta. To follow Eric Gordy in terms of what he has given is a hard task. I mean, Eric is someone who I have deep admiration for, someone who's spent his whole life in this area. It's great to be here, but what I would say, Eric, is that I'm glad you were invited to Coventry and not sent to Coventry. I don't know if you know the joke, but Coventry is known for that, and I hope you never, I pray you never be sent to Coventry.
Thank you.
We're changing the notion of that thing.
Eric talked about Dayton, and I just want to just carry on that. In terms of Dayton Agreement, Eric mentioned not just the politicization of ethnicity, but also what I would say is Dayton is sustaining the very ideology that we are trying to eliminate, that we should eliminate as human beings. Sustaining the very ideology that led to genocide, sustaining the very ideology that created hatred, the very ideology, people when they talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina, they understand in terms of war, but actually there's more to that. What is it that led to war? Is it just territorial greed, or was it something else? There was a particular ideology. It wasn't just the nationalism is supported by a particular ideology, and we must understand that. And let me just highlight that. Biljana Plasic, who was a Fulbright scholar, professor of biology, published a very renowned academic who published work in referee journals, and when she became the leader of the Republic of Srpska, by the way, she's she was indicted by the tribunals and she was convicted. So Biljana Plasic is his name, and you can Google her, and if you don't know her. This is what she said. She said that, and I quote, that those people who embraced Islam had deformed genes. And these genes gets worse and worse over time, over centuries. And that is why it is difficult to do business or work with these people. That's that's where you take that to. If you look at the international courts, the International ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal, and look at some of the cases that they've gone through, the cases of Dragan Obrenović, or the cases of Tolimo, which is the recent. If you look at those cases, and what these people say is this, that during the mistreatment of the Bosniaks, the Muslims, they were forced to not just sing the Serb national anthem, but they were degraded in terms of what their beliefs were, degraded for who they were. If you look at Tolimo says that we were taught to hate. If you look at Dragan Obrenović, who says that we lost ourselves in hatred. So there's a particular ideology that existed, and let us not forget that. That ideology led to genocide of a particular group. That in Srebrenica, but if you look at other places like Foča, if you look at other places like Prijedor, or other places across Republic of Srpska, which is the territory where the Bosniak population, the Muslim population, is in those areas, if you look in Srebrenica, are in minority. And you were saying that people are fearful of coming back. The policy of ethnic cleansing that led to. So Dayton is sustaining that ideology, that it did end the war, but that ideology where children who go to separate schools learn revisionist history. Children who are growing up learn something different. What is the future that Dayton is creating? What is the future in terms of the divided society? This is the same society that was integrated. This is the same society, the same race. So to say it was assimilated would be an insult, because the same race. White people killed white people because of the name, because they had different name. This is quite shocking that when we had said never again after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, that it happened again, and for Srebrenica to happen. Genocide is one of the worst crimes that can happen in our times, in humanity, in mankind. That genocide to happen after the Holocaust has happened is something which is unthinkable. We had said never again, but it did happen. And that, to me, poses two questions. One is this, that if, and the politicians in this country say that the problems we have is is that people are not integrated. If you are, by the way, a student of race relations or student of sociology, etc., you'll come across the integration debate. I'm one of the people who sat on the Oldham Rights Inquiry that was appointed by the government and the Home Secretary. We coined the term cohesion after the Oldham Rights Inquiry in this country. But the point is that if you say integration is the solution provider, then look at Bosnia, Herzegovina, where it was the same race. And if we were to use the term for the time being, which is assimilated, they lived with each other, for generations. But neighbor turned against neighbors. People murdered. People were co-opted to murder ordinary people. The bus drivers, the factory workers, they were all co-opted to murder and buy into that ideology. Is something which is absolutely unbelievable and shocking. So that integration isn't the only solution, that we have to look at in terms of the causes, and we have to teach from a young age in terms of getting rid of the prejudice that exists. So in terms of Bosnia-Herzegovina, that if this could happen in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where white people killed white people because of their name in 1995, not so in far away land, but on our doorstep, in civilized Europe, where we claim to be very civilized, then could this happen in the UK? Could this happen in France? We just come through in terms of the attacks on Paris, where the whole purpose of those, people are to divide communities. Those whole purpose is to cause that civil war, to cause that hatred, etc. Could it happen in Europe? And that is why it's important to remember Srebrenica and to learn the lessons. If it could happen to people in Bosnia just because they were Muslim, could it happen to me? I'm a Muslim. Could it happen to my children? I have 2 boys. Would they come after me? And that is the sick ideology that needs to be eradicated. And those people who support that kind of ideology or who sustain that kind of division are part of the problem. And that is something which cannot, in a civilized society, the type of Europe that we want to create, cannot be sustained, cannot be maintained, and must not be entertained at any cost. So this is the issue that when we talk about Dayton, that we do. And when I talk to survivors, when I talk to the mothers, they say to me that we need a Dayton 2, because this is not, Dayton isn't going to solve the problem, because the reason we need Dayton 2 is because the very people who are in power because they appeal to their ethnic groups for votes, and why would they want to change anything? So from that angle, if we were to develop and move further in terms of moving Bosnia-Herzegovina further, then this is something that needs to be looked at. And tomorrow is the 20th anniversary. Tomorrow is the 20th November. It is the 20th anniversary of the Dayton Agreement, and we need to reflect in terms of where things are 20 years on. It is this background that led to the creation of Remembering Srebrenica, which is the UK charity that commemorates Srebrenica, that learns the lessons from Srebrenica, And it is this background that it has the support of the Prime Minister in this country, as well as the opposition leaders, whether they're Labour Party or the Scottish National Party or Liberal Democrats, and as well as the various faith leaders, whether it's the Chief Rabbi, whether it's Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, or the head of the Catholic community in this country, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, that these leaders are involved in the initiative that's been promoted. And the idea is that we must first of all accept that genocide happened. We must accept that there was an ideology that led to genocide, and we must learn the lessons to create a better, safer society for the benefit of everyone, to ensure that this is not repeated again, that we must take this to schools, to education institutions. Remembering Srebrenica is the body that organizes, that does three things in this country. One is, firstly, is the commemoration of the Srebrenica Memorial Day. This is on the back of the European Parliament resolution, which was passed in 2009, asking every member state to commemorate Srebrenica Memorial Day on 11th of July. We have national commemorations, and this year we had national commemorations of the United Kingdom in Westminster Abbey, where 2,000 people attended, followed by a reception in number 10 Downing Street with the Prime Minister, as well as reception by the Speaker of the Parliament, John Bercow, in the State Rooms. We had then national commemorations in Wales at Welsh Parliament by Calvin Jones, the First Minister, and then Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, as well as in Northern Ireland, the DUP and Sinn Féin commemorated in Belfast in City Hall. With those national commemorations, we had 200 cities and towns across the United Kingdom who commemorated in civic centres, cathedrals, churches, synagogues, and community centres across, and it brought together 25,000 people in terms of the commemoration, in total, as well as the messages that went out to people. The review that we've done has been received by the opportunities to receive the messages has been received by up to 66 million people in terms of the coverage that was received on our messaging. So just to conclude, because I can see I've got another eye at the back of my head. I can see Maria actually looking at the time. So just to conclude, that in terms of the commemoration that we had is the first area of work. The second is lessons from Srebrenica visits, education programs. So we take people from here, teachers, young people, civic leaders, to Srebrenica to see what has actually happened. To see, it is, I don't know if you've been to Srebrenica. If you haven't, you should. I would invite you to go. By the way, you can apply to come on our program. Go onto our website, which is srebrenica.org.uk, and you can apply. It is a fully funded educational trip, and it's a very powerful program because you get the chance to talk to survivors and learn the lessons. But you have to come back. There is, nothing is free. There's no free lunch. There is something you have to do, which is that you go, but you have to come back. You have to make a pledge to do something in return to tackle hatred, to promote cohesion, and that's something which you have to obviously say. So you'll be selected on a program based on the quality of your pledge. So that's the second thing we do. We have taken 500 people so far from the United Kingdom, and those 500 people are now have become our community champions. They're the champions against hatred, champions for and advocates for cohesion, champions who will stand up against any form of extremism or intolerance. And I've just come straight from the UK National Board of the Remembering Srebrenica that brought together people from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the different English regions. The third thing we do is we work with schools to teach the lessons of Srebrenica. So we have so far, by March 31st, we'll have 20,000 children who would have learned the lessons from Srebrenica, the education pack that we've launched, which is also being now launched by Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, as well as in Wales. But in England, 20,000 children would have learnt in the last 2 years the lessons from Srebrenica. For me, it is shame on Europe that when we have passed a resolution in 2009 asking every member to commemorate Srebrenica, that is still not done in other countries. And if we look at the challenges that Europe faces, the challenges that of extremism or intolerance and hatred, whether you talked about Geert Wilders or Madame Le Pen, or whether you look at the far-right organization in this country, or the extremists from faith groups that exist, etc., that those challenges require us to learn the lessons from Srebrenica, because it is memory that shapes us, and it is memory that teaches us, and it is memory that we must keep the candle alive. The candle must be lit, and those who do not commemorate are condemned, and don't remember, are condemned to repeat it again. So for me, what is absolutely crucial is that we learn the lessons. We are learning the lessons in United Kingdom, but this is something that needs to go across Europe in order to help create the cohesion that we need, a safe and better society for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And on that note about memorialization, so that will be the discussion that Dzeneta will introduce related to her dissertation on the Bosnian diaspora, and memorialization and transitional justice issues.
Hi. Thank you all for coming and finding the room. It's a challenge we like to give people when they come to the university. Find us. Thank you for the speakers for very engaging perspectives on your own work so far. I will continue in a similar degree, in sort of a similar vein, bringing together some of my research as well as incorporating some of the points they have mentioned so far. A little bit of balance is the last speaker. So, as Maria introduced me, my name is Dzeneta Karabegovic, and I'm a PhD student here at the University of Warwick in the Politics and International Studies Department. And my PhD analyzes diaspora influence on a weak state in a post-conflict environment, seeking to explain how diaspora mobilized transnationally and how hostland and homeland contexts influence this diaspora engagement. So I integrate diaspora academic debates into the study of transitional justice and develop a typological theory of diaspora mobilization, which sounds like a lot of academic talk, but I'll get more clear. Basically, empirically, my research focuses exactly on Bosnian diaspora mobilization in Europe around these issues of transitional justice. So how societies come to terms with atrocity or war crimes after the fact, and how they move towards democracy, and ideally towards some sort of reconciliation. And genocide remembrance and political participation of the diaspora groups. And so here I'm interested in how diaspora mobilize based on these issues in the different political environments in which they find themselves. Transitional justice processes in post-Yugoslav states retain a particular importance, not only for the region, but also more broadly, as the 1992 to 1995 war in Bosnia and Herzegovina generated a disproportionate number of refugees and was the site, as mentioned before, of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Today, many of these former refugees, and I assume some of you are in the room as well, retain dual citizenship and are, for the most part, to use the term, integrated very well in the same European societies, as well as the world. So it's an interesting population to look at. I've done fieldwork in both Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Sweden, France, and Germany, as Maria mentioned. And each of these countries have Bosnians living in diaspora, as we say in Bosnian, who mobilize in different ways in response to both their host countries as well as the homeland. And I've been particularly interested in the importance and effects of translocal communities within these diaspora groups. So Eric mentioned a little bit about how Bosnians might very well identify as being from Tuzla, from Banja Luka, from Sarajevo, rather than Bosniak, Croat, Serb. So I sort of move this forward and look at whether it happens in the diaspora or not. And when examining the Swedish-Bosnian case, the association of Banja Lukans is a particularly good example. Almost 1 in 4 Bosnians in Sweden is from Banja Luka today. So it's an association that is very much at the root of this translocal community. And so my thesis builds on the idea of these translocal communities being an important factor in helping to determine the level of diaspora mobilization, in addition to grievance claims that Maria has talked about a little bit. So throughout my research, I focus also on genocide remembrance, which is very prevalent in the diaspora. The Srebrenica UK initiative is a wonderful example of how remembrance activities can not only help raise awareness about specific events, but at the same start dialogue about the consequences of division in societies, both in countries where genocide happened, but also more broadly, in the European case, in this case, or the UK. In my own research, I've looked at cultural production in the diaspora around genocide awareness through diaspora artist collaborations. So in an article I published last year, I argued that diaspora cultural production can in some cases be more moderate, actually moving beyond dominant ethno-nationalist political debates in the homeland, while at the same time reaffirming belonging to a specific host community for the diaspora itself. So the example that stands out in the article is the Što te nema, or in English, Why Are You Not Here initiative, which the artist calls a self-perpetuating public monument. And over the last 10 years, it's been organized annually in a different city on July 11th, the anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide, as well as the day of commemoration and collective burials in Srebrenica proper. It happens in parallel with these commemoration activities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in different cities around the world each year. So in the past, it's happened in Stockholm, in The Hague, New York City, Toronto. This year, it was in Geneva. I'll speak a little bit more. I can speak a little bit more about the details of it in the discussion period, but I'll give you just a quick idea of what it looks like to summarize. So it's a collaboration between a diaspora artist who's based in New York City, Aida Šehović, and respective diaspora communities in the cities in which it is organized. And basically, they come together to build a self-perpetuating monument, as they call it, in a main public square in each of the cities. So think of places with high visibility. In New York, for example, it was in the United Nations building. In Toronto, it was in a big public square with a lot of sort of foot traffic and a lot of public people coming. Bosnian coffee is brewed throughout the day, and filcans, the small porcelain cups that Bosnians drink coffee out of, are placed on the ground, expanding throughout the day, and each one symbolically representing a victim of the Srebrenica genocide. And diaspora volunteers from within that community help the artist brew the coffee, and then encourage the public who are walking by and sort of wondering, why are you putting coffee cups on the ground, to sort of help participate by pouring a cup of coffee, and then are told about the Srebrenica genocide and the lessons thereof. Some diaspora members will share their own stories with the members of the public walking by, and it becomes sort of a community building event. The project is interactive in not only that it asks participants to help pour coffee, but also to think about the persistent question after genocide of why, što te nema, within a larger context, even though the specific event is being commemorated that day. So this kind of approach directly emphasizes the absence of genocide victims who are no longer present, but also invites further discussion on these topics, as well as their relevance for the society in which the monument is being erected on that day. Transnational cultural production, as evidenced by initiatives like Što te nema, demonstrates the potential of diaspora mobilization towards promoting a message of not only genocide remembrance and education, but also of modeling engagement and expression that departs from the usual homeland rhetoric. Cohesion, in a way. Maria mentioned a co-authored article we're working on together that's under review, and there we focus more specifically around other memorialization initiatives with substantial transnational diaspora involvement, so diaspora in different countries working together towards memorialization. And we use the case of Prijedor and more specifically Omarska, which was the site of a former concentration camp during the war in the northwest of Bosnia, for those of you who know the geography of the country. And we argue there that diaspora utilized transnational networks embedded and sustained in different contexts to mobilize, identifying the processes moving from sort of the local to the national to the supranational to the global engagement level. In this case, building a memorial in Omarska to acknowledge what happened there. There was a former concentration camp site at the beginning of the war, and acknowledging the victims thereof. While the memorial in Omarska remains to be built, the diaspora involvement in the memorialization efforts in Prijedor, including both around Omarska, as well as later on the White Armband Initiative, which some of you might be aware of, Dan Bijelih Traka, shows more recently that better understanding of how diaspora utilized frameworks of transitional justice and their ability to shift between these scales can help inform us about similar other global movements and initiatives. Moreover, it can inform us of how refugees of today that are coming, potentially from Syria and other countries, might mobilize towards their homelands tomorrow, so informing the debates to come. I'll also quickly highlight another piece of research that was touched upon, that I basically look at education and how diasporas have an effect in transitional justice process around education and youth. Education is one of those things that wasn't explicitly incorporated into the Dayton Peace Accord framework, and education in Bosnia has been widely criticized, both in academic and policy circles, as being segregated and contributing to ongoing divisions within that society. So for youth who've grown up in the post-Dayton education system, which Eric touched upon, it remains difficult to find this common Bosnian narrative for them, as in many ways they participate in, they're separated in different classrooms, they're taught revisionist histories separately, and in the case of Mostar, there used to be the sort of two schools under one roof system, which you might know of. Basically sharing a school building but not coming together with the same curriculum or classroom. So I explored different Bosnian diaspora initiatives around these issues of education and youth to try to bridge together academic literature about diaspora engagement and transitional justice on one hand, and transitional justice and education on the other hand. I won't go into the details of the initiatives, we can talk about it later in the discussion, but I'll just quickly note that some of them, they focus on local empowerment of the communities in which they try to create change, and collaborate with Retuni communities in an effort for fair access to education within both the Retuni communities as well as the larger Bosnian community. So basically, I argue that the fragmented governmental state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and when you're looking at education, there's 14 ministries of education on the Bosnian level. So you're looking at the Ministry of Education on the state level, the Ministry of Education for the Republika Srpska, for the Federation, and then, like Maria said, the Federation has 10 cantons. Each of those also has a Ministry of Education. And don't forget, Brčko also has a system. So welcome to Bosnia, just as another one of these fun examples. So I argue that within this fragmented state, especially in the field of education, there's a vacuum that's been created where where diaspora can act based on their own initiatives to a degree, even though they receive pushback. I hope that our presentations have in part highlighted the importance of diaspora communities in post-conflict societies, as well as elucidated the political situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the last 20 years since the Dayton Peace Accords. My research so far has found that navigating the tricky, to say, Dayton framework has in large part been frustrating for diaspora actors who are trying to create change in their homeland. They consider this fragmented nature of the country today as demonstrating a lack of inclusivity of citizens, as Eric discussed, and mostly based on ethnic belonging. This in some ways echoes sentiments of the general public in Bosnia and Herzegovina today, as evidenced by the protests we've had over the last few years. It will be interesting to follow these developments through, both in terms of diaspora mobilization and the constitutional framework and potential changes, hopefully, maybe, after Dayton, as well as memorialization efforts and moves away from and towards reconciliation, hopefully down the road. So I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of you for excellent presentations and giving us your point of view on the Dayton Agreement and on the diaspora. So I think we spoke a lot, and maybe it's a good idea to just open it to the public for questions. We have had a couple of suggested questions about how, for example, the diaspora people will be more effective about helping Bosnia in different initiatives, or how we can deal with ultranationalist parties that may be creating a lot of havoc for diaspora communities. And I was not in the best shape to explain to you, but in a certain way, in my research in the Netherlands, it was very visible how Bosniaks, but also Serbs and Croats mentioned that they draw parallels between people who are having hate speech today, ultranationalist parties and any others, and those who are on trial. And what was really uniting them was their political rhetoric, and it was very powerful. One of my interviews was mentioning that he was having a conversation with somebody from Lebanon in the early 90s that the hate speech that was going on in 89 and 1990 was very detrimental. And the person from Lebanon told him, this is really bad, what is happening in Yugoslavia. And the person didn't believe that. And then, I met this person in 2012 and talked to that person. And he said, I am warning every day everybody around me about what is happening here with this hate speech that is taking place. And this is polarizing these societies while people do not understand it. It's slipping slowly. Maybe it wouldn't polarize in the way that we see in different countries because institutions in Western societies are stronger. But, the question that Dr. Azmi is bringing, and in a certain way I'm bringing with my research, is really important about how to really stop or transform these discourses in order to have better solutions for people who live here and there. So, please, open to the discussion. Yeah, please.
Thank you all for your amazing contributions. I learned so much. Oh, thanks.
Thanks.
I have a really, really big question. I don't know who would like to answer it, really. But I just wanted to ask, to kind of gauge what the panel thinks, to what extent does Dayton represent the failure, really, of the modern nation state in relationship to the kind of inherent inclusivity, exclusivity that the nation state puts forward? That it is. Does that make sense? And in relationship to that, when we look at what is happening in the Middle East, people say it's the Balkanization of the Middle East. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that, but I'd be interested to know.
Okay, thanks. Let's collect a couple of questions, so to give room for the speakers to think about. Yeah, Brioni.
Also thank you very much for the excellent talks and lots of thought-provoking things coming out of that. But I have just, in a way, quite a straightforward question about what the panel knows and understands about the connection between diaspora groups and diasporic activities and the plenum movement that Eric was mentioning. I've been quite interested in kind of protests and, in a sense, sort of movements and political agency within Bosnia that attempts to create a space for that, a dialogue outside of those ethno-national groups. So I'm thinking also the development of political parties like Naša Stranka and what's the relationship between the diaspora and these, what might be considered to be quotes unquote more kind of moderate or democratic forces within Bosnia today. I'm just very interested. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And one more question and then we will go to the panel. Please, yeah.
In the last chapter of his book Post-War, Tony Judt suggests that memorialists can be, some memorialists anyway, can be mischief makers, and that we'd all be better off if we didn't memorialise and left the treatment of the past to professional historians. I just wonder what you think about the more general idea that the best way to deal with terrible legacies, maybe sometimes to forget them and leave the treatment of them to specialist professional historians. It's just a question.
Okay, thank you. That's a huge question. Yeah, I mean, do we want to?
It comes with a caveat.
Do we want want to respond to specific questions? How do you feel about that? The first one about the modern nation state, and the other was about diasporic movements and Nasza Stranka and more.
On the modern nation state.
Yeah. And the mischief makers. So who wants to take it?
I can talk about mischief if you want.
Okay, then you can talk about
Yeah.
the mischief. Okay.
I'm good at that.
I was going to take the mischief
Oh,
makers.
sorry. Do you want mischief?
No.
Okay.
I think you can both
I-
take it. It was a big question.
We'll give Waqar mischief, and then I'll take Plenum's anti-nationalist parties.
Okay.
Well, shall I start with the mischief makers? Because that was the latest question, so it'll be in our mind in terms of what the question is. No, it's something like a genocide that happens. You can't forget. Where there is a absolute destruction, the will and the ideology to destroy and eliminate a particular ethnic group, the existence of a particular ethnic group. And the genocide isn't just about the physical genocide in that sense, I'll come to that, but also cultural genocide, where you destroy libraries, where you destroy the whole existence of a particular ethnic group or religious group, the very existence, so you destroy it. So there's a cultural genocide going on. Then, in terms of physical, there's two. One is that you rape the women because you believe that you want to impregnate them with a superior race. 20 to 50,000 women were raped in Bosnia and Herzegovina. How can those women forget? And how can those women just leave to historians? And then you have the boys and the men who are separated into buses to destroy, to murder them so that they cannot procreate. This is something to just leave it to history books, and as we learn from the Holocaust, is that it is impossible for humanity to forget. And if you do forget, then it will rise again, as the saying goes, that those who don't remember are condemned to repeat it again. When I have spoken to people in Srebrenica, the survivors, the mothers, what they say too, this is another angle, what they say is that this is to them is therapy. When the opportunity to tell the stories in terms of what happened is to them, because there hasn't been any justice or reconciliation aspect in terms of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where people haven't had the chance to say what they experienced. So there is lots of reasons as to why it couldn't be left to historians at all, and the memorialization that we have in this country and that we encourage other countries to do is to learn that lesson, so that we don't repeat it again, so that we have people who understand the diversity that exists, who are able to respect and who are able to live in, have the tolerance to live. There are people who have put that argument forward, and I would say that to forget is to cause more problems. And we live in a country, I can't talk about the country, I can talk about UK because I am British and I am English. And I tell you one thing, that in UK we have hundreds of years of history of remembrance. That's one country here, I'll tell you, that we have a tradition of remembrance. And that's something it galvanizes people and brings people in our country.
Thank you. So, Eric, you wanted to take the other question?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the question is on the relation of diasporas to the plenum movements and to some non-nationalist or anti-nationalist political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'd say definitely the relationship there is very strong. And if you want to look at the place where the plenum movement really originates, and that had the longest and most sustained plenum, and that's in Tuzla. Two of the people who were really very, very strong organizing forces in the Tuzla plenum, it is Jasmina Husanovic and Damir Arsenijevic. probably not by coincidences, are both people who have degrees from the UK. And you'll find similar kinds of relationships in the political parties, including the leader of one of the national political parties. And please forgive me, I've forgotten the name that he was given at birth. But in the course of his political career, he decided to change his name to one that was not readily identifiable with an ethnic group as an expression of his political belief. And he renamed himself after the city in Austria where he studied. So he is now Dennis Gratz. And I am hoping that one day I will be able to produce some regional politician who will rename themselves UCL. I think that would be an excellent name. So you see this strong relation. I mean, there's definitely diaspora and international influence in the formation and maintenance of these political movements, but it's also reciprocal. There are a lot of people from other parts of the world who looked at movements like the plenum movement. I mean, the term plenum, the closest historical referent to it is in the very early Soviet period, before the Communist Party really establishes its power, and spontaneous citizen governments were formed in many places through plenums, and it's an idea that's really fallen in disuse since then. I guess the Soviet Union doesn't have the reputation that it used to either, but there are a lot of people looking at what citizens were doing in Bosnia and Herzegovina and saying this is a potential model for revival of democracy. But I also have to mention another side of diasporas, okay? And that's this, especially if you look at diasporas in the region itself. There are a lot of people who hold dual citizenship. And you can definitely see a strong influence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, people who hold dual Bosnian and Croatian citizenship. Croatia has an interesting provision in its electoral law. There are 10 electoral districts, and then the 11th electoral district, which is loosely defined as Herzegovina and Australia, that is the district in which the diaspora votes. In the last elections, which were just a couple weeks ago, over 80% of the votes from the 11th electoral district went to the right-wing party. It's what brought them to parity with the government that they were opposing. And so you see a real strong pattern that people with dual citizenship will very often vote for the more liberal parties in the country where they're a part of a minority, and for the extreme right parties in the country where they're a part of the majority, and they'll vote in both elections. And could I maybe just add one more point about memorialization?
Yeah, sure,
okay. Because we've talked a bit about memorialization, and we've talked quite a lot about Srebrenica, which in many ways is kind of a symbol for the violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I want to pick up on Dzeneta said a little bit about Omorska and about Prijedor. I mean, this is certainly the second largest side of violence. And, the trouble with any kind of memorialization that turns a place into a symbol is that it tends to contribute to overshadowing all of these other places. And Prijedor is an interesting place, I think, first of all, because of the intensity and the scale of the violence. It is the only place in Europe, for example, where people were forced to mark their houses and their identities, with white flags and white armbands. This has not happened in Europe since the Holocaust. There was very, very large-scale violence. A large percentage of the town's Bosniak population was forcibly deported or murdered. More than 10,000 spent times in the camps. Omorska was just one of them in the vicinity of Prijedor. And Prijedor is, the reason that I mention it, is that there's a connection to the UK. Prijedor is a mining town. And one of the principal local industries is steel. In 2004, the local mining operation was built by one of the largest mining and steel corporations in Europe. It's a company based in the UK, Mittal Steel. And Mittal Steel has been perfectly willing to go along with the local authorities in Prijedor in trying to prevent the construction of any kind of permanent memorial place for the victims of this terror, because there's a strange community of interest that both the local government and Mittal Steel have decided that this sort of public memory is mischievous, interferes with their opportunity for profit. And of course, I mention that because it's a point on which people in the UK are possibly able to bring a little bit of pressure.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eric, for bringing this point. And we have this article that's going to be coming soon, so we will be sharing it with all people who might be interested to learn more about it.
Maybe I could say, if people want kind of general background on Prijedor, just a week or two ago, there was a good in-depth article in the New Yorker about it by Nijara Ahmetašević, who is one of the better young journalists in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I can call her young because I'm old. But I believe that it's available online for free. If you go to the New Yorker magazine, they have only ever published 2 articles about Prijedor, and that's one of them.
It's also available on our social media. So although we do focus on Srebrenica, if I may say so, we have also posted this article on Prijedor, and it's wonderful.
Okay, thank you very much for bringing this. Dzeneta, you had a point on it?
Yeah, I'll just continue. Denis Grac's real name is Mohamed Gracic. I googled it.
Thank you.
I also forget this on a regular basis because we know him as Denis Grac these days. And to touch a little bit on the diaspora connections with the plenum movements and in general sort of their political leanings. In many ways, diaspora, what I found during my field research is that quite a lot of them will stand a little bit outside of these ethno-nationalist debates, in part because they don't really have to engage with them, right? They live abroad and they don't need the sort of results that you get if you declare yourself as a member of a constituent peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And quite a lot of them actually, when I sort of interview and ask, well, who would you vote for when you were voting? And I was doing research in Germany a few years ago, as well as in Sweden, and they would tend to say Željko Komšić, who at the time was the sort of more moderate of the right-leaning and general political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As far as the plenum movements, I completely agree with Eric about the sort of diaspora connections, and there was an excitement when the protests happened that, oh look, there's change, there's potential for change, something that for many of those in the diaspora who are active in trying to create this change in the same ways, were for the first time seeing, oh, there might be some light. There might be some ways that we can penetrate these systems that have been so rigidly installed within the country over the last 20 years. I think, like I said in my speech, quite a lot of it is very much shrouded in frustrations still. And, this in some ways is parallel to what the community in Bosnia and Herzegovina experiences. Yeah, I'll end on that there, and it's a really interesting sort of connection with when you look at Prijedor, because in Prijedor or around Prijedor, Kozarac, Omarska, quite a lot of that is the largest returnee community. So for many of those individuals, they're returnees to the Republika Srpska as individuals who have been displaced, who have been sent away in buses. Many have survived concentration camps, who've returned and basically exist within these ethno-nationalist political structures as the minority within the RS majority. And the diaspora that belongs to that, who remain outside, or many of those returnees who might live in Bosnia and Herzegovina for 6 months, 3 months, however, and then in the diaspora for the rest of the year, identify very much with this sort of difficulty in Bosnia of not being able to be citizens, right? Full citizens. An example of this would be that if you do decide to declare yourself a Bosniak in the RS, you cannot run for president because you have to declare yourself as a Serb, because the Serb member of the 3-member presidency in the RS in Bosnia has to come from the RS. So it's another way of how basically they become secondary citizens within their countries. I'll just touch quickly on the Balkanization aspect of the Middle East, and I think I spoke a little bit about it as looking at how diaspora engage with their homelands today, as potentially engaging how refugees of today might engage with their homelands tomorrow. And the whole idea of the Balkanization of the Middle East and this comparison quite often that happens in foreign policy circles between Bosnia and Syria and Dayton as the model peace agreement is very, 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 very complicated and very, very problematic in the sense that it engages a lot of tropes and a lot of ancient ethnic hatreds arguments that really don't have much basis in reality. There was recently Ben Dennison and Yasmin Mujanovic published a wonderful article that you can also get publicly available on the Monkey Cage blog in the Washington Post, engaging this very question that Amelia touched on about, Bosnia is not Syria, and the solutions that, were found in Bosnia to resolve the conflict should not be the same solutions used in Syria. So they explain it in a much better way than I ever could. So I suggest you read that rather than listening to me. And I'll hand it off here.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I can add a quick comment without sounding too academic about the modern nation state. I think that definitely the modern nation state is experiencing, on the whole, lots of problems itself, not simply with the Dayton agreement and what we are seeing, like carving territory by ISIS in a couple of different states, but in general with the diasporas is this extraterritoriality that becomes part of the governance of the state. So even if you are not Dayton, even if it's just a simple country that has a diaspora ministry, it is like a huge movement towards engaging diasporas abroad, whether in voting processes, whether in memorialization processes, whether in funding processes, in various ways. So in the sense, I think the modern nation state is there in its way of being challenged by way of all these extraterritorial movements that the diasporas are an exemplification of. But I think that in the sense of the Dayton Agreement, it is more about the failure of consociationalism, and for me it is a big issue because it is sometimes a cookie cutter story that becomes taken from one country to another because there is no better, what in a certain way Eric was mentioning earlier, and the revision of that multi ethnic consociational agreements where each elite governs within their own group needs to be really rethought. And this builds on my previous comment about Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon was a thriving place in the 60s and until the 70s. And then it came to Yugoslavia, and then it may come to other places. So we may want to think in the policy community and in academic community about alternatives. Okay, so I think we are out of time, but if you want to ask other questions and the speakers want to answer them, I'm very happy to stay. So I just want to respect people's time. But we are all here for something that we really care about, and I wish we can speak a bit longer.
And we're happy to talk to you after, and you can contact us. We're all on Twitter. Or an
some of
email.
us all the time.
Hey, I'm not on Twitter all the time.
So as you prefer. Yeah. You want to go? Okay. So, I mean, if you want to go, I just would be really appreciative if you can sign up for this the exit poll about how much, so we can see how much you learned from this event. So that would be very helpful for us. But we are very happy to engage outside of this panel and this meeting, whether now or at a later stage. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.